You know, I've been on this earth a long time. I done met presidents, pastors, billionaires, and barbers that think they know more than all three combined. But every now and then, life got a way of humbling you. And for me, that moment came when I realized I didn't really know who Prophet Muhammad was. Now hold up, don't get me wrong. I knew the name, everybody does. You hear it in the news, in conversations, in classrooms. But I ain't never studied the man. I never looked past the headlines or the little one-liners folks like to throw around. You know how people do, they give you snippets, sound bites, opinions, but they don't give you the truth. So one night, I'm sitting up late, same way I do when my spirit's restless. And I'm thinking, all right, Steve, you've been talking about Islam all this time, but you don't really know the man who started it. Who was he really? So I picked up a biography, then another, watched a few lectures, listened to some brothers talk about the Prophet's life, and man, what I found out hit me like a ton of bricks. Because let me tell you something, I expected to read about some mighty warrior, some strict leader, some man who just demanded power and obedience. You know, like history likes to show you sometimes. But what I found was the story of a man who cried when the poor went hungry. A man who mended his own clothes, swept his own house, patched his own sandals. A man who buried his own children and still smiled at the world with compassion. Man, you can't fake that. I sat there like, hold up. This is the most followed man on earth. Billions love him and he lived like that. No throne, no palace, no guards, just humility, just heart. And the crazy part is the more I read, the more it felt like I was reading about somebody who had already been guiding me my whole life without me even knowing it. The first thing that shook me was how he grew up. Born in Makkah, his father passed before he was even born, his mother when he was just 6. That means he came into this world already tested, already broken, already walking through pain most folks would have used as an excuse to give up. But not him. They say his uncle raised him, and from a young age he was known as Al-Amin, the Trustworthy. Now you got to understand something. When everybody in your city, rich, poor, friend, foe, calls you the Trustworthy, that's character. See, I done worked in TV long enough to know people can fake an image for a while, but they can't fake a reputation. That name Al-Amin, that's what really got me, because it told me right away this man wasn't made in a palace. He was built in hardship, in honesty, in faith. Then I read about when revelation came. Now picture this, you 40 years old. You ain't done nobody wrong. You live in simple, you meditate in a cave, just trying to make sense of this crazy world. And suddenly this angel Gabriel appears to you and says, read. And he's like, I can't read. 3 times, read. I can't read. Man, I paused right there because it wasn't about literacy. It was about reading the signs. It was about opening your eyes to truth, even when you think you don't got what it takes. And when I read that part, I said, that's me right there. I ain't got no theology degree. I ain't no scholar. I'm just a man trying to figure it out. But God still talked to folks like that, folks who don't feel qualified. Then I read how when he came down from that mountain shaken, scared, he went straight to his wife Khadijah, and she didn't judge him, didn't call him crazy, didn't run away. She wrapped him up and said, by God, he would never disgrace you. You know what that is? That's love. That's real partnership. That's a woman who saw her man breaking down and said, I believe you. And I said to myself, boy, we don't talk about that enough, because if more people understood that the prophet's story started not with power but with love, maybe they'd see him differently. He didn't start an empire with an army. He started it with truth, with revelation, with faith, and it wasn't easy. His people turned on him. They mocked him. They threw trash at him. He lost his wife, his uncle, his friends, but not once did he curse them back. I read one story where he went to a town called Taif. He went there just to share the message, and they ran him out, stoned him till his feet bled. And when the angel came and said, we can destroy this place if you want, you know what he said? He said, no, maybe their children will believe. You know how much mercy you got to have to say that, to be hurt and still hope the best for the ones who hurt you? That's divine. That ain't normal. And as I read more, I kept saying to myself, this man, he ain't just teaching religion, he teaching how to be human. Because look, the world we live in today, it rewards arrogance. It praises people who shout the loudest, show the most. But this man, this prophet, showed the world that real greatness is quiet. It's in service, it's in patience, it's in faith. He didn't own castles, he didn't wear gold. He'd sit with the poor, eat dates and smile. And I'll be honest with you, I felt ashamed because I realized how little I knew, how quick I was to believe what the world told me about Islam instead of learning from the man himself. I put that book down and said, Steve, you've been reading a lot of people's opinions about the prophet, but now you're finally meeting him. And man, he changed me. So I kept reading night after night, and I swear to you, The more I learned about Prophet Muhammad, the more I started asking myself questions I didn't even know I had. See, when you live in this world long enough, you start picking up a lot of noise. Fame, money, politics, pride, it all gets so loud that you forget what's real. But the Prophet's life, man, it's quiet. It's humble. It cuts through the noise like clean air in a smoky room. I read how he used to walk with orphans. He'd sit with the poorest of the poor and make them feel seen, like they mattered. And I thought, that's the kind of man the world needs right now. You know, I've hosted shows, I've met people from every walk of life, and let me tell you, I've seen arrogance in million-dollar suits and humility in janitors. But when I read about the Prophet, it was like I found the blueprint for real success. Because here's this man who could have had it all and chose simplicity. He chose service over luxury. He chose to forgive when he could have destroyed. He chose mercy when vengeance would have been easier. And I sat there read and thinking, Steve, when's the last time you forgave somebody who didn't deserve it? When's the last time you smiled at someone who talked bad about you? And man, I didn't like my answer. Because see, we all talk about success. We all talk about happiness. But this man showed it ain't about what you get, it's about what you give. And not the kind of giving where you expect applause. I'm talking about giving from the heart, where nobody even sees it. There's this story that really hit me. One day a woman used to throw trash on the Prophet every time he walked by her house. Every day she'd do it, same time, same place, and one day she didn't. So he stopped. He asked, where is she? They said she's sick. You know what he did? He went to visit her, checked on her, prayed for her. And I'm sitting there like, who does that? You can't tell me that's just a good man, that's something higher. It's like he was teaching us that revenge don't heal nothing, that anger don't elevate you, mercy does. And it made me think about how we live today. Social media, arguments, politics, hate. Everybody want to clap back, nobody want to forgive. Everybody want to be right, nobody want to be righteous. But this man, he chose righteousness every time. And let me tell you what else moved me, the way he treated women. See, I ain't never read nothing like that from the 7th century. He said, the best of you are those who are best to their women. He said, paradise lies under the feet of your mother. Man, when I read that, I said, wait a minute, this is 1400 years ago, and this man talking about women like that? While kings were treating women like property, he was treating them like queens. He didn't just preach respect, he lived it. He helped his wives around the house, he listened to them, he sought their advice. And I thought that's not just love, that's leadership. Because a real man don't need to stand on somebody to feel tall. A real man lifts others up. And that hit me deep because I got daughters. I thought if every man on this planet treated women the way this man did, we'd have heaven on earth. Then I came across the story of how he lost his son, Ibrahim. And it broke me because you expect a prophet to be unshakable, but he wept. He held his child in his arms and cried. And when someone asked him about it, he said, the eyes shed tears, the heart grieves, but we say only what pleases our Lord. That right there, that's strength with surrender. That's faith that don't deny pain, but walks through it. And I realize we've been told for too long that faith means pretending you're okay. But the Prophet showed that faith is crying and still trusting God through the tears. Now here's the thing that shocked me most. For all the love he gave, for all the forgiveness, the patience, people still hated him. They still called him names, tried to kill him, drove him out of his home. And I thought, man, if the most patient man on earth got hated, what makes you think you won't? See, that's when I learned a new kind of peace. The peace that comes from realizing that people's opinions don't define you, your purpose does. And the Prophet's purpose was bigger than revenge, bigger than ego, bigger than pain. It was to remind us all that God's mercy outweighs his wrath. There's this one hadith, a saying of the Prophet that made me stop cold. He said, if you put your trust completely in Allah, he will provide for you as he provides for the birds. They go out hungry in the morning and come back full at night. Man, I stared at that for a long time because that's the kind of faith I've been missing. That's the kind of peace I've been searching for all these years. The kind that don't come from money or fame or applause. It comes from trust, real trust. And then I started seeing the pattern. The Prophet wasn't teaching a new religion. He was teaching a way of life, a way to live with peace in your soul no matter what's happening outside you. He smiled more than anyone, even though he suffered more than most. He gave more than anyone, even though he owned less than most. He forgave more than anyone, even though he was wronged more than most. And I thought, that's the kind of man I want to follow. Not because he demanded it, but because his example made me want to. And the more I read, the more I started asking myself, what would the world look like if more of us lived like that? If more of us prayed for our enemies instead of cursing them, if more of us smiled through struggle instead of complaining, if more of us saw service, not status, as success. I started realizing Islam wasn't spread by swords. It was spread by character, by honesty, by mercy, by truth. And when I read that his last words before he passed were, "Be mindful of your prayers and be kind to those under your care," I just sat there silent, because that's all he ever wanted, for us to pray, to remember God, and to take care of each other. Man, I thought I was just learning history, but I was learning how to live. You know what's crazy? The more I read about Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the quieter my world got. All that noise in my head, the fame, the pressure, the next show, the next deal, it started to fade, because I was looking at a man who had everything that mattered and nothing that most of us chase. He didn't have palaces. He didn't have private jets. He didn't have 1 million followers shouting his name, but he had peace. And that peace, it wasn't from comfort. It was from connection to God. See, I've spent my whole life trying to make it, trying to climb, trying to be somebody. But this man, he made it by bowing. He climbed by kneeling. He became somebody by serving everybody. And I thought, hold up, that's flipped upside down from how the world teaches us success. In this world, they say, talk loud, be proud, chase the bag. But this man whispered to the heart, gave away what he had, and said, the real rich man is the one content with what Allah gave him. And that hit me, because I've been rich and still restless. I've been praised and still empty. I had the applause, the cars, the lights, and still felt like something was missing. But when I read about him walking humbly, praying at night while the world slept, crying for people who mocked him, I said, that's a man who knew God for real. He didn't just believe, he lived it. He didn't pray just for blessing. He prayed for forgiveness. He didn't serve just to look good. He served because his heart couldn't do anything else. And I realized maybe closeness to God ain't about preaching. Maybe it ain't about how many verses you can quote or how many followers you got. Maybe it's about how you treat people when nobody's watching. That's what the prophet did. He prayed for the ones who hurt him. He fed the hungry before himself. He forgave the ones who wanted him dead. And I thought, man, that's divine strength, because anybody can love when love's easy, but to love when it's hardest, that's heavenly. It reminded me of something else I read, how one of his companions once said the prophet's face was always smiling and his heart was always remembering God, always smiling, even when life was hard. And I said, Steve, when's the last time you smiled through pain? Say, I've been through things, times I didn't know how I was gonna make it. Times when doors slammed in my face when I thought it was over. And I remember back then I used to ask God, why me? But now I look at the prophet's story and I think maybe it was never punishment, maybe it was preparation, because every test he faced, every loss he suffered, every betrayal, it built him into the man who could carry the message of God. And that made me think about my own pain. Maybe the stuff I went through wasn't there to break me. Maybe it was there to wake me. Maybe God's been calling me this whole time. I just wasn't listening. And then there was one story that sealed it for me. When the prophet came back to Mecca, the same city that had exiled him, mocked him, hunted him, and he stood before the people who'd once tried to kill him. And you know what he said? He said, go, you are free. No revenge, no pride, no payback, just mercy. And I remember closing that book, sitting back and whispering to myself, that's what being close to God looks like. It ain't loud, it ain't showy, it's mercy in motion. And man, I realized something deep. If the prophet could forgive them, who am I to hold grudges? If he could stay humble in victory, who am I to be proud in comfort? If he could bow 5 times a day in gratitude, who am I to forget my Lord even once? And that's when it hit me, Islam ain't just a religion, it's a rhythm of bowing, thanking, forgiving, serving, a rhythm that connects your soul to its source. 5 times a day, every day, until peace becomes your default state. I sat there thinking, this man lived over 1,400 years ago, and yet his light's still reaching people like me. A kid from Cleveland who thought he'd seen it all, only to realize he hadn't seen nothing yet, because I'd seen success. But now I was starting to see truth. You know, after all that, I sat alone one night. No cameras, no audience, no laughter, just me. And I thought about everything I'd read about the Prophet Muhammad, everything that man stood for. And I said to myself, Steve, what you been chasing? Because see, when you get older, you start realizing all them trophies don't talk back to you. Them cars don't hold your hand when you're scared. Them checks don't pray for your soul when you're gone. But faith does. Faith fills that space that fame can't touch. And that's what I saw in Islam through the life of the prophets on the lawless Sallam, a faith that fills the empty. It ain't about money. It ain't about status. It's about peace. Ain't that what we all want? Peace. But the world got us thinking peace is something you buy or retire into. No, man, peace is something you return to. And that's what I felt when I read about how he used to sit with his companions. Simple, humble, kind. How he laughed with children, respected women, honored his neighbors, even cared for animals. It hit me. The man who had the power to rule nations chose instead to serve hearts. And I thought, if the prophet of God could be that humble, what excuse do I have? You know, I remember one time I was in Dubai. I was walking past this big mosque and the call to prayer started. And I saw folks just stopping what they were doing. Phones down, shopping carts still, everybody just turning toward God. And I stood there, man. I ain't even Muslim, but I felt something like time itself had bowed. And I thought this is what it means to remember God in a world that forgot him. It reminded me of that verse I came across. Verily, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. And I'm telling you, I've been chasing rest my whole life. I tried money, fame, success, applause, but I never found rest till I found meaning. And meaning came from stories like his. You start asking yourself different questions. Not what do I want next, but what am I doing this for? Not how do I win, but how do I serve? And I'll tell you something else that changed me, how the prophet treated women. See, I grew up watching how this world can be cruel to women. And yet here's this man 1,400 years ago saying the best among you are those who are best to their wives. Now that's a real man right there. Not by power, not by pride, but by how gently he carried those around him. And you know what that made me think? That maybe true strength ain't in what you can lift, but in what you can hold without hurting it. That's wisdom. That's divine masculinity. I've been trying to carry that into my own life. How I talk, how I lead, how I pray. And every time I feel myself drifting, you know, when the noise gets too loud, I go back and read about that man who started with nothing but faith and changed the whole world. And I think if he could trust God through that, then I can trust him through this. Because look, life gonna hit you. You gonna lose people. You gonna fall short. But the prophet taught that even when you fall toward mercy. And that's what I hold on to. So now whenever I see a Muslim praying, I don't see difference anymore. I see discipline. I see devotion. I see a mirror reminding me, hey, Steve, don't forget who made you. And I ain't saying I got it all figured out. I still got questions. I still got flaws. But I'll tell you this, learning about Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, didn't just teach me about Islam. It taught me about myself. It taught me that greatness ain't about standing tall. It's about bowing right. It taught me that legacy ain't what they say about you when you're gone. It's what God remembers about you when you meet him. And I realized that man Muhammad, he didn't just bring a religion, he brought a reminder that no matter where you're from, what you've done or what you believe, there's still time to return to peace. And maybe that's why when I finished learning his story, I didn't feel confused, I didn't feel judged. I felt invited. Like God was saying, Steve, you see what peace looks like now. You ready to find yours? And man, I'm still walking that road, but I'll tell you what, ever since that day, I ain't been walking alone. If you ever wonder who the Prophet Muhammad was, don't just read the books, look at the way his followers pray, forgive, and serve, because that light, it never went out.